working class rising up. This is the ruling class punching down.
My day's bigger than your day.
First rule of gladiator school, bro. Don't punch down.
Charging into a goblin.
Hail Trump!
The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within.
Control your own body.
We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
We can fight the entire grinding system. Nobody can. But together, everybody can.
I did nothing wrong.
Hello and welcome to Did Nothing Wrong Live, the show that cuts through the noise and helps you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff Somke, and with me are Jay McKenzie and Carl Folk. In today's episode, we will discuss the information shutdown currently happening across the federal government, as well as the sorry bunch of Trump cabinet nominees currently being vetted in the United States Senate, and Trump's threats to expand the U.S. prison camp at Guantanamo Bay. Keep listening to learn more, and remember to smash those like and subscribe buttons, kind of like Trump smashing the websites that keep us safe and healthy. Today is Friday, January 31st, 2025, and we saw the modern-day equivalent of a book burning today. Word started circulating this morning from scientists at the CDC that they needed to back up data from the website, specifically on HIV, trans issues, anything to do with anything that might be remotely construed as a woke agenda. They were saying they were going to shut down this website imminently. And it also seems that code has been changed. So now you can't archive it. Internet Archive won't let you. Archive.org won't let you. They want this information gone. And this is one of the few times that I find myself lacking in the words to put all of this in proper context about just how bad this is. Because if another pandemic was to come along and just say it was as bad as COVID, maybe it is, we would lose millions of people in the immediate impact because of the choices that the Trump administration has made in the last 2 weeks since they took office.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an exaggeration. I wish it was, but it's not.
No.
Between the decisions they've made at the National Institutes of Health and the CDC, we're not ready. Carl, Jay, tell me I'm wrong.
No, we're not ready. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like, we're nowhere near there, right? Like, we're facing down H5N1, which we know is percolating and doing very, very weird stuff up until the shutdown of kind of all communication. We were getting pretty good information that showed it was in a very bad way already within the industrial farming, world. And we have had a couple human cases here and there, but it's starting to do, worse. And so when you have that coupled with now what, is kind of what appears to be the wholesale gutting of history and now turning these systems into tools of control versus tools of education, we're deep into not just uncharted waters, but waters that tend to run in one direction. That's never good, especially when faced with truly nationwide problems, let's say.
Right. And the more we have gone on today, the more we have seen various websites either going offline for the day or going offline for a couple hours for maintenance. Reuters has an article out saying that things are going down because they're getting scrubbed of DEI. But, great question. And Jay, you and I have covered this a bunch. The people who are currently pulling a lot of the levers in government right now are literally these 25-year-old Groyper kids. How much of this stuff do you think is ever coming back?
Well, who knows? And who knows how many of these pages are going to come back? Who knows what the ones that do come back, what the changes are going to be, and who is going to have time and go through each page and compare and contrast. And you're right, you can't archive if the page is back up tomorrow, right? The reason they added this code, the robots.txt, so you can't archive it, is these sites are going to come back online. Some of the pages are going to be missing. Some of them are going to be changed, but you can't archive tomorrow's page and then compare it to a week ago. And that is very intentional. That is what they have done with Twitter. That's why you can't go in there and save and archive all of this information on Twitter, because they want to be able to say whatever they want to say without consequences. They want to now at the government level make these changes and remove things and not talk about things and not have anyone really be able to question it. And even if you're right, even if you do question it and you're correct, you're going to have to get screenshots, and they're going to look at those screenshots and say, oh, those are fake. Oh, you doctored that. Oh, you photoshopped that. That's not real. And then they're going to sue you, and they're going to have the power of Elon Musk or Trump or one of the other billionaires. And what are you going to do? This is the whole point. I mean, this report, and I think we're probably going to get to this with the Los Angeles Times and an op-ed that was written today that was published, and the author was intending to attack and criticize RFK. He got on Blue Sky and talked about it. He wanted to essentially say there are problems with the healthcare industry, but this is not the right man for it. And the Los Angeles Times edited out his own op-ed, changed the title, changed the conclusion, and removed the harshest criticisms. And then the owner of the Los Angeles Times tweeted it out as if this was an endorsement of RFK Jr. to get confirmed. So, and on top of this entire shit sandwich is the fact that you have very egregious and obvious cases of lying, manipulation, unreality with the Los Angeles Times. But then you have the New York Times, who even when they pick this up, do we really trust them to call a lie, to properly convey the threat, the issue, what you should be concerned about, what this is going to do to us? No, of course not. Of course not. I mean, that's why we exist, right? That's why we're here talking about it, because elsewhere there's not enough.
And it's sad that it falls at this point to a bunch of ragtag podcasters and journalists and people who are increasingly finding it harder and harder to get any kind of outlet that's at all mainstream to publish their stuff. Like, we're all being marginalized here.
I mean, this is the authoritarian environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is the thing that really is something that, for those of us who have worked within kind of trying to counter that, understanding it, the academic world around that, like, have tried to describe, but you can't really convey what this is, right? Like, the real-time watching of reality being manipulated by people who are clearly doing it and kind of just saying, what are you going to do about it?
Right.
Is kind of that classic thing. And when you have an information environment like the one we have now, where there are questions, if what you're reading at the papers of note are saying, like, that's a whole new world. But couple that with the fact that now, there are going to be claims that anything that shows otherwise is a fake or AI or a lie. No one here is ready for that. They've never had an adversarial reality product before, right?
No way to disprove this anymore. It used to be you could take an archived screenshot of a web page and say, no, that's a lie. On January 29th, your web page said this. On February 1st, it says this. But you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, well, they that made them real mad. They had to suffer some consequences for several years, particularly in 2016, 2017 on, and people called them out for the things that they'd said, and MAGA hated it. And there was a while there where people getting kicked off Twitter, and they were too extreme and it was too much, and they thought, we've hit a roadblock. We can't get past this. Well, guess what? They figured out how to get past this, and then some, and then a lot more. And I did want to say real quick, if anyone hasn't seen it, the Los Angeles Times story came out from Eric Reinhart, and we found him on Blue Sky. So Eric Reinhart.bluesky.social if you want to see his thread talking about this, because it just is a very clear example of what we're dealing with, and the kind of, in some cases, in his case, the impossibility of fighting back.
Yeah. And I mean, it's great that he did that. I am 100% a fan of this guy now. But the problem here is that the LA Times has an absolutely massive reach, an absolutely massive subscriber base, one of the biggest newspapers in the country. And the journalist who actually wrote the article has no recourse but to go to a somewhat obscure social media site and, plead his case there that he didn't mean to say any of this. It's like a new level of printing the correction on the sports page in the back. Now you don't even get the correction. You have to go somewhere else to find the correction.
Yeah, no, and I mean this is the authoritarian information environment, right? Like it's not just that everything is questioned; it's that it's a play for domination, right? Like
Right.
this is how power now is going to work, where power is going to lie. It's going to do it with impunity in front of us to establish a dominance structure,
Right.
a hierarchy. And I think, the more people are starting to understand what this actually is, the more that's going to become apparent, right? And because of that, you're going to see more and more aggressive language. It's going to turn into a cycle here for a bit because they are going to have to establish dominance over the population. And that's my big concern right now is how does this group that hits all of the characteristics for both civil conflict as well as genocidal actions, how do we actually start to approach this now that they have the power to dominate, the power to control not just our daily lives but the reality we take in, because that is where this goes now.
And we have to be very conscious of that now, more so than we did 2 weeks ago, even more so than we did a week ago, because they are now really starting to flex on their sense of what can we get away with, because they've been pretty emboldened over the last couple of weeks. They haven't seen a whole lot of pushback institutionally at all, really, or really from anywhere. There's been a steady parade of cabinet nominees for some of these jobs. And again, these are some of like the least qualified people. We all know about Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense. Jesus Christ. And, Tulsi Gabbard, everybody who's paying attention knows her deal. RFK Jr. And Congress has not, at least in my opinion, done their advise and consent duty here. This is like they've rolled over. They've just decided to let him have all of his nominees, all of these just sorry people that he's decided he wants to run these federal agencies.
We'll say, at least this week, when we really get to some of the just absolutely awful nominees, like Tulsi Gabbard for DNI and Kash Patel for the FBI and RFK Jr. for destroying Health and Human Services.
Health and Human Services, can you fucking believe it?
Yeah, anti-vax, but we're gonna make the MAGA's been pushing the Make America Healthy Again, MAHA, big this week, and yeah, that's not the guy that's gonna do it. Let's just we don't want polio to come back. I listen to these podcasts and I'm back in the groove listening to all of this. We don't want polio or measles to come back. We're gonna nominate the guy who's definitely going to push that forward and make it a whole lot easier for that to come back, and has even had some direct contributions to the deaths of children when he's promoted his activism and discouraged people from taking
when he went over
vaccines.
and did his little take it all off tour in Samoa. That was great.
Yep.
Yeah. Democrats have asked some tough questions. They have been hard on these nominees, partly because it's easy, because these people are terrible. But it's all, look, I mean, it's good that they're pushing. It's good that they're asking tough questions, but they're not pushing hard enough. And it's still all traditional and maintaining norms. It's within the understood, the respectable way of pushing back and asking the tough questions. And I've seen them plenty of times. I've seen it with Kash Patel. They ask him, the confirmation hearing, Dick Durbin has Kash Patel kind of tongue twisted and tied up. And he asked him if he's familiar with Stu Peters, right? Who is a far right podcast host. And Patel has a long pause. He looks uncomfortable. He, kind of moves a little bit in his seat. And he said, not off the top of my head. And Durbin has a great comeback. He said, "You've made 8 appearances on his podcast. That's great." But then he stopped.
Yep.
Then he
Yes.
stopped, and he didn't say,
Well,
"Hey,
and that's
do you
the
agree
thing.
with Stu Peters that people should go read Mein Kampf?" And he won't do it, and because that
Yeah.
would be too much, and they won't go there, and they need to.
Well, and what's funny is like right now that pissed off Stu Peters to the point where Peters is like, I have text messages between he and I because we text all the time. And like, it's one of those things where like these people, right? Like, I think he said they've texted back and forth a number of times. This is that petty thing with fascists, right? Where like when one of them kind of even hints that like there might not be a relationship where there might not be a power thing where there is, these guys get mad. And it's, if the Democrats were smart, they would hire some counter extremism experts and some people who are experts in the far right and the modern kind of new right, and they would get them in their offices to explain everything, because this stuff they could be making again hay in a way that's fundamentally impossible to get over if they had any want to do that. But there seems to have been some kind of agreement that they literally aren't going to push back, and some of them now are starting to speak, like I said earlier, in a way where they might. But like this stuff that came out about Schumer and the conversation that happened around the initial pushback to federal funding being cut and stopped is absolutely damning. And it really, I mean, the president of the United States literally just pulled security from Milley, from Pompeo, from a whole number of people, and then publicized it, put a target on. What are we doing?
We know at least some of these people have been targeted by, hostile governments, hostile foreign governments. I mean, I'm no John Bolton fan. I have no use for John Bolton whatsoever, but I don't want to see the Iranians knock him off, And they've tried, and they'll try again.
No, and that's just it. I mean, him publicizing that on top of it, this just goes to the Democrats' incompetence in this moment and inability to rise to it, except for the governors seem to be the ones that need and are speaking up, right? You have Pritzker saying what he said. Now you have other governors starting to do things that look a lot like, pushback. And the National Democratic Party, though, seems to have said to each other, there's nothing we can do, so we're going to act in the best interest of bipartisanship and trying to keep norms. And it's just not how this is going to go.
No. And some of these people absolutely need primaries.
So the White House is governing asymmetrically. They have Elon Musk and his cronies and these groypers and these people who understand asymmetric information warfare, and the Democrats I don't think could even explain what those words mean. That's the gulf that we're dealing with here. I think it's so far outside of their comfort zone that you're right. They need counter extremism experts. They need information warfare experts. They need people who listen to Bannon and all of these influencers and understand what they're saying, why they're saying it, and what to do about it. It is a complete rethink that is necessary. That, I mean, they don't look that a lot of these people who've been in Congress for 10, 20, 30 years, they know how to fundraise. They know how to talk to people without ruffling too many feathers. But they don't get this.
No. And the thing is, most of them are from safe enough districts that they're probably never going to have to deal with this on any kind of level. Somebody like a Nancy Pelosi, I mean, she's got that seat as long as she wants it, basically. And the problem is when you get too many people who are too safe and you put them all in the same room, there's no incentive for anybody to stick their neck out on any of this. There just isn't. They're all going to be fine individually. Collectively, we're screwed. But individually, they're all going to be fine, and they're all going to get reelected. So, yeah, you're right. We need some people that understand the new battlefield. We absolutely do.
Yeah. No, I mean this is a whole new world now, and like we're dealing with something that's so far outside of the norm in a democracy, let alone in this country, that there has to be a fundamental rethinking of how we're going to go forward politically, right?
Right.
And because a lot of these people, whether that's Elon's people or Trump's people, are legitimate Schmidt adherents and deep kind of fascist legislative and government philosophy types. This is something that um, the Democratic Party, and I think for the most part the Republican Party at large, fundamentally doesn't understand, and definitely doesn't understand the threat they represent.
Right.
And for the Democratic Party to actually mount a pushback on this that has any chance, they are going to have to open some kind of war footing for the party, but also some form of like outward messaging, right? That can counter the bullshit, can show that the CDC and things have been altered. Maybe not directly, but show what has gone on. Literally form a counter to this.
And I want to go back to something you said like a second ago when you talk about messaging and you talk about like what you can do to counter and push back, because you mentioned adherence to Schmidt. And I just want to be sure everybody in the audience knows who we're talking about here. The quote has been coming up more frequently out of various Claremont Institute types and people who are sort of government adjacent. The sovereign is he who determines the state of exception. And that is a German legal scholar and jurist by the name of Carl Schmitt. And he was talking literally about Adolf Hitler because he was the preeminent legal scholar and jurist in the Nazi Party during the Weimar Republic in the Nazi era. So this guy was using that to justify Hitler making these kinds of big wholesale changes. And you've got a bunch of people who are very adjacent to the levers of power right now. They're quoting him approvingly.
Yes.
And they're using it to justify the idea why Trump wouldn't want to kowtow to any of these activist petty judges or these legislators. And it's like, you are literally quoting a Nazi who was talking about Hitler to make a point about how you obviously seem to think the founding fathers didn't know what they were talking about when they wrote the Constitution. This is the easiest slam dunk messaging layup I think I've ever heard. It's like, say it into the mic.
It's unbelievable.
With
It's
your whole
unbelievable.
chest, please.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
So yeah, it's been a week. It really absolutely has been a fucking week.
Part of what gets me with this, with all of this messaging and the people they're quoting and listening to and citing, is it's simultaneously so very fascist, Nazi party, but it's also so Soviet. And it's they're combining the two, throwing out the disinformation and the lies and the unreality and finding their justification for seizing power and seizing this. And look, you want to argue about, was it a Nazi salute? Was it not a Nazi salute? Oh, who can tell? Who can say? But what is the argument here? These people sure have read their Mein Kampf. Now, they're not Nazis, but they just understood why Mein Kampf was so popular. They just understood why the Czechists and the Soviets were such good purveyors of disinformation. Doesn't mean they believe any of that. Doesn't mean they share any sort of ideology with these people. They just learn from the best. I mean, that's the most charitable way of looking at this, which is so absurd
here.
Yeah, I'm gonna read Goebbels and what he said worked from propaganda messaging and what got his message out there to the people and swayed hearts and minds. But I'm gonna do it in a good way. I'm gonna do it in a way that's gonna help people. Is that your fucking argument? Because that's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. That is their fucking argument. I mean, honestly, that is what they are saying, is that like, well, you got to hand it to him. It's that whole you got to hand it to him thing. And it's like, no, you don't. No, you don't. This stuff is all fruit of the poison tree. No one's saying it doesn't work, but you have to be better than that at some point. You have to draw a line and say, no. I mean, the medical community did that. They don't use the results of the experiments that the Nazis ran on people. How is this any different?
We're so far through the authoritarian looking glass that, like, if you had asked me even a couple days before the inauguration, I would have really not expected them to push certain parts of this as hard as they have, unless it's as a form of testing their limit with the public. So I think, this is right at the edge of where they've figured out they can push without causing real pushback against them. But at the same time, this is compounding now. Like, most people weren't ready for this in any way. And when people told them that, like, Project 2025 was going to happen, or the steps after that were going to happen, they didn't understand that. And they definitely did not understand that the Nazis and guys who truly believe in the underlying forms of governance that the Nazis believed were going to have a hand in this. It's a disaster of messaging and counter messaging that we're now going to be living with real world repercussions that are horrifying.
And of course, everybody printed the denials. Everybody printed that. People said, hey, look, they want to do Project 2025. We promise you, this is what's going on. They're making it very obvious. And then they were like, no, we don't. And everybody treated those two statements like they were equally true when they put them out there. And now we can kind of see who was lying and who was using discernment, as it were, as they've said. And it's really frustrating because people are now kind of waking up. People are now starting to really understand exactly what they're dealing with out there. And the options for, handling this have gotten so much worse in the last, 2 weeks or, since November.
The one thing that they did this week that finally got Democrats off their ass and to push back for the first time really was the memo from the Office of Budget and Management freezing all the federal funding, right? And it just created chaos, disarray. Nobody understood what it meant. They were waiting to see, are the courts going to weigh in? Is this legal? Is it not legal? Even if it's illegal, are they still doing it anyway? And can anyone stop it? I mean, it was complete disaster. And it was bad and good. Democrats called it out and they actually started to show a sliver of spine. That's great. But what was that, 3 days ago? At this point, so much else has happened that, it was bad. There was backlash. People called it out. And eventually Trump reversed it. And it's still not fixed because there's still uncertainty about what exactly it meant and is going to mean in the future, and whether any of it was legal. It's still a chaos, but the news cycle has moved on 10 times over. And so, this is one of those things that it's, if Obama had done it, if Biden had done it, we'd be talking about this for weeks and months, and it would have been a huge scandal. But now, honestly, most people have probably already forgotten it, if they even knew about it in the first place, because there's 50 other things that had happened. And this is all by design. This is all by design. Yeah. And they're going to keep doing it this way.
You are being rushed from one crisis to the next. Just, you can't keep up.
Yeah, this is the information overload environment, right? Like, this is what happens, when you get people to the point where all novelty pushes them past the point of exhaustion, right? And so now the game is just keeping people in a constant state of tension with themselves and externally. And I don't think they're thinking it through like that, but I think that the outcomes are the same, right? All of these questions, all of the questions about whether this agency is actually here, is it gone, has it been affected? All of these different things start to bounce around in real unpredictable ways. And a lot of people aren't going to be able to discern what the net outcome is, but the impact's going to be the same as if it was intentional or not.
Right. And who says that there's anything different at this point about it? It's really, if you were planning to wreck the government in the shortest amount of time, what would you do differently? What fundamental changes would you make to this approach?
Well, right. And I mean, that's just it. And I think that's the scariest part for me, as someone who is deeply tuned into a conspiracy community. This is the perfect environment for people to start grasping at whatever is the shiniest option in the room, even if
Yeah.
it's not the right one. And that's really dangerous, right? Like we are just sitting in a super heightened emotional environment, one that's incredibly novel,
Yeah.
super ambiguous, and is just the perfect environment for things to really turn people away from collective sense making in a way that I never thought I would see truly here.
Right.
But I'm actually starting to get concerned that we're going to have a real moment where people just kind of decide to say nothing is real, and why should I give a shit about any of it, and just a mass tuning out, right? And like, if it's already cutthroat and social Darwin to the core, which is what these people want, because that breeds the violence they need, and want to shape society, like people may check out, and that's ultimately the point. And I'm concerned that we're actually going to reach that environment way quicker than I really understood it was going to be, because normally you kind of click things in, but if we're just going to do trauma and get people nice and traumatized, that's another tactic to do it. It's the brutal one, but
it is. And look at, I mean, you want to see an example of this? Look at how many people jumped on this election was stolen conspiracy theory that certain people who are kind of, I guess, blue and on adjacent were pushing real hard. The idea that if we went out and somehow, if somebody did something, we would be able to overturn the results of this election because it was obviously stolen. And these people had no problem, especially the big influencer types over there, pushing this to their fan base. They know these people are hurting. They know these people are traumatized. They know exactly what's going on, and they're putting that out there. They don't give a fuck.
It's the same just asking questions. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Yeah, it really is.
We're not saying it was stolen, but maybe someone should look into it. We're not going to do it ourselves, but maybe somebody should, and maybe you should give us some money, because we're
do your own research on whether it was stolen or not.
Throw our hands in the air.
Yeah. Well, so during World War II, well, directly kind of as things were moving to it, the Nazis made a plan to deport every Jewish person in Europe to Madagascar. Not just Germany, all of Europe. And when you have that thought process, right, is this eliminationist thought process. And what this is, whether it's Guantanamo, whether it's the Nazis with Madagascar, it's an intent and a stating of intent to eradicate these people, groups, and thought processes from society.
Right.
And the thing, any of this, whether it's the Nazi plan for Madagascar and eventually just the Jews of Europe, as they would continue to say, is that you can't do what you're going to say, right? Like, you can't deport this many people. What you can do is you can murder them in an industrial fashion to not have to incur, quote, the cost of putting these people on these places.
Because that's where all this leads. That's where all this leads at some point.
Well, ultimately, it's a system of thought, right? And it's about eliminating people from public life and society. There's really not many steps between we're going to remove undesirables and put them on an island to we're just going to remove undesirables and don't ask questions about why it rains ash on your small town every Thursday and Friday afternoon.
Right.
There's not many steps between that, and that's the dark reality, right? Because it's setting up a system of thinking that is inherently based on eliminating people that aren't what you want from the view of society.
The whole aspect of this where there is no truth, there is no certainty, and people just give up is what I'm talking about. This is so Soviet or modern day Russia. This is the information environment that country, the Soviet Union, Russia, all experienced, dealt with, and en masse, people just gave up. They tuned it out because they didn't believe anything. They thought everyone was lying. Nothing was real. You can't even if you wanted to get at the truth, you're never going to have it. So why bother? And people just
Yeah,
kind of
seriously.
accepted their fate and misery, and they just went about their lives because they felt helpless.
Yeah.
And you can understand why. And that is what this is doing and pushing the American public towards. And it is by design, and it is by people who have read this stuff and have read Soviet propaganda manuals and figured out how do you convince people that there
Absolutely.
is no truth and you should just stop trying to get at it.
Right.
Because that's the
Well, and I
question
mean,
they're
that's
asking.
yeah, and that's the whole thing, right? Like this is the authoritarian, like the hybrid authoritarian regime information environment. It's little bits and pieces from a whole bunch of different movements and thought processes within authoritarian movements across time and countries, and they kind of have assembled this thing that then can use any aspect of that, right?
Right.
To shield itself or to maintain or grow power. And it's totally something that can be tailored for whatever population it's in. And, this has been how the transnational fascist movement has been working for a decade now, pretty openly. So, I think that's the thing. This is what a truly authoritarian information environment is and functions like. And it's not fun to be in, right? Like it is energy taking to be in, and most people don't have extra energy in this country.
No. So bad right now to the point where they feel emboldened enough to say that we are going to expand Guantanamo Bay. We are going to take all the undesirables that we can't ship elsewhere and put them here. We already know we're catching up people in these ice sweeps that have every right to be here. They've rounded up some Native Americans. How long is this going to be until we've got American citizens being interned at Guantanamo Bay?
Right.
It blows my mind. It really does.
I mean, it's going to be immediate, right? Like
Yeah.
if they actually go through with this, this is kind of our Madagascar plan.
What steps can we, as individuals who don't want to sign off on this, what can we do to push back effectively, both at the national level and at the local level, where it might make a lot more of a difference?
We're starting to see it, right? Like Chicago, the head of the Border Patrol is somewhat upset. And the head of some of the other agencies are out here saying like that Know Your Rights groups have made such a good impact that they can't effectively do what they're trying to do. That's a huge step, right? Like getting people to understand their rights, not to open doors, not to do that, is huge.
Mm-hmm.
But for the rest of us, right? Like for people who have conscience and a soul, who want to help do this, people are organizing, right? And there are groups out there right now that are organizing for helping both on the ground, basically in a capacity to teach people their rights, and in other cases to do other things. And there are groups both locally and nationally that are out there doing it. And it just depends on where you are, right?
Right.
And for a lot of people, this might be their first exposure to like really thinking about how do we start to push back. And it's really look locally and look in your community and talk to people because there are going to be people who know where to go out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also, we can talk about electoralism, but I think while we're still in the middle of all of this, if you've got a representative that's not on board, is pushing some of this away, you should probably call that representative. You should probably set some time aside every day to make phone calls to that representative's office. Same with your senators. If your senators voted yes for any of these nominees, you should probably call them and ask them why.
You absolutely should. And that is the right way to actually do something and not feel hopeless and not feel just inundated with this news. And let me tell you, part of the reason you should be doing it is because the other side is telling their listeners to do it every day, repeatedly. They are talking about it. You've got Steve Bannon on there saying, light them up, call them, even if they're not. They're promoting apps that'll get you in contact with the right people for their messaging. You may not even be, these are people that may not even be in the district of the person that they're calling, but Bannon and all of these influencers saying, call them, put pressure on them, make them know that this needs to change. So look, if it was pointless, if it was useless, they would not be saying this, but they're saying it every day. So the way you fight back is to do the same thing.
Exactly.
Make those phone calls because it does matter.
And they have made it a cool thing to do amongst their base. They have made it something that you get social credit for, that they really encourage that and, you know, put people up that do it. We really need to do the same thing. We need to stop with the defeatism, at least with the idea of this is never going to work. We're never going to be able to get anywhere. Well, let's give it a better try. Let's see if we can make it a cool thing.
Right.
Let's see if we can make it something people should do.
Well, and it comes down to too, like, people want to do something. People are sick of feeling helpless. And like, that's just it. There are going to be avenues we need to find for people where they can channel that. And the Democrats need to figure out too, if they don't channel that, they're going to lose something fundamental.
Yeah.
And like, they I don't know. I think it's one of those moments where people are starting to come to, and that is good, but things are moving faster than we are right now. So we have to actually get out ahead of this versus being in reaction. And the Democrats have been in reaction for 30 years. So people on the ground have to now maybe take this on the front end and say, look, we're going to do the hard work that they're not doing. And if that means we're going to deal with our state governor or our state electeds as well as the federal ones we're calling to do something that's closer to home that might make an impact personally in a different way, that's great. I think this is going to be a time where people are going to have to do multiple things for a while across their weeks, across their days.
Carve out some time out of your schedule if you can. We're all busy.
Well,
Everyone is.
we're in the middle of a coup. Act like it. That's the reality. Like, it's not hyperbolic to say that. Like, when you have the General Services Administration now saying that none of their employees have access and they've lost control as Musk's team came in and set up servers.
Right.
I think people should get comfortable saying, like, this is a coup. And it's ongoing, and we have to actually do stuff if we want any chance. All of us have to do stuff now if we want any chance of getting things back. I don't know how we do that without people understanding that, because our electeds aren't going to be the ones ultimately who have every one of the avenues to stopping this, because we all have a role now. And it's a scary world now. We're living in a place that is inherently hostile to us. And the people who are hostile to us are now trying to destroy the federal government. I'm generally someone who looks at these things and says, okay, there's a pattern here, there's a scale, there's some level of like upper range that things can hit. This doesn't have an upper range right now. The assault on our country is only accelerating. They're not slowing down. They are furthering and emboldening themselves. And we have to just admit that and work forward, which means everything from calling representatives to organizing with your friends to backing up data that the federal government tries to destroy. All of those are avenues. We all have a place.
Yeah. And the thing is, once you've named it, once you've said, the world is a scary place, but here's some stuff we can do to take back some agency, to feel like it's less scary. That helps more than I think most people realize. The idea that you have taken that first step into, I'm going to make my own world less scary. I'm going to make the world around me less scary by pushing back on this. That helps a ton. So really, that's the first step, I think, is to find someplace where you can start doing something. And it's easy to find. There's a lot of it out there right now.
Yeah. I mean, we are going to have to be our own hope for a little bit here. And that's very powerful, but people are going to have to find those moments and those seconds and those days where they have that hope, because it's on all of us now to really bring this thing back.
That's where we're at. Well, folks, that's our show for the week. Remember to like and subscribe on your content platform of choice, and we'll see you next week. And remember, everyone mentioned did nothing wrong. Bye now.